All right, so this is the DREAM Act Part 3, Legislative Advocacy. And we're really grateful for all of you that have been joining us in our three-part series. We first started talking and sharing about what the DREAM Act was. The second was talking about your story and how to share your story and the power of your story. And now we are going to start talking about how we put that into practice and how people can ensure that legislators and individuals that have power to make a difference can be moved by using our stories. So I'm going to take the liberty to start by sharing my story of how I got involved in advocacy. And I was 19 years old. I went to Tallahassee to advocate for a Florida bill that would give Dreamers in-state tuition. I had never lobbied, never talked to a politician, and honestly, never saw myself as someone involved in politics. I used to actually say, when I was like 17, 18, I would say, oh, I hate politics. I'll never get involved in that. Well, here I am. But after graduating high school and getting the chance to go to college, well, my two older sisters and many of my friends weren't able to because they were undocumented. And I got in, I felt a responsibility to speak up and do something. So after one meeting that we had in Tallahassee, that I went as a representative of student government with my advisor, Minnie Vasquez, she pointed to the Capitol. She drove, pointed to the Capitol, and said, go. And I was like, go where? So I walked into the Capitol terrified. I started trying to figure out quickly what I needed to do. And the first thing was like, let me go look for a map and who these legislators are and their offices. So once I had that, I started going door by door, asking people, telling the staff that were there. I did get to encounter a few legislators and tell them about this bill, HB 109, that would allow for Dreamers and documented students to be able to pay in-state tuition at the state colleges and university in the state of Florida. And in the first office, I could barely get words out. They were looking at me like, what are you saying? But by the fifth office, I started finding my voice. I started finding my script. I started refining. And since then, it's almost been 20 years, more than 20 years since that happened. And I can tell you that I've testified in Congress twice. I've advocated in different state legislatures across the country and have passed legislation alongside the Dream.Us in places like Maryland, Massachusetts. I've walked hundreds of times the halls of Congress in Washington, D.C. And this is what I learned. You do not need to have a perfect script or years of experience to make change. You don't need to be a professional. You don't need to be a lobbyist. Your story enough can make a difference and will make a difference. Your story really matters. And even though it took me 30 years to become a citizen, all along the way, before I had citizenship, I used my voice to help move not just our issues forward, but our country forward. Because reality is that things like DACA, which we were collectively able to win by using our voice and sharing what was happening to our community, really has helped communities and the country as a whole. So today, we are going to learn on how each of us can help move the DREAM Act forward too. I'm really excited about this because we've been little by little, as I said, getting to this point. And all of you that are here are going to have an opportunity to learn and hopefully use your voice to make that happen. I really believe that all together, right? And we'll show a little image, but hint, hint, it's the fish, right? One little fish maybe cannot make a difference. But if all these little fishes come together, we can definitely make a huge difference. So I'll turn it over to Susan to get us started.
All right. Thank you so much, Gabby. I actually met Gabby in the halls of Congress back in the day when I worked at the U.S. House of Representatives. This session for me, I've loved all of the advocacy sessions we've done together, but this one is especially close to my heart because I've been on the other side of receiving advocates, and I know what a difference it makes in terms of a member of Congress's agenda and moving things forward. So I just want to reiterate, thank you so much for being here. This is such important work, and we couldn't do it without you. So, as we've alluded to, this is a third in a series so far. We gathered together 2 months ago for a very first session to learn about the DREAM Act, what it is, who it would benefit, and heard from staff in Congress about the state of play on that bill. You can't advocate without finding a means that's comfortable for you to share your story to change hearts and minds. And so our session last month was how to tell your story. And among other things, we went through a 5-point plan to walk you through each of those steps to pull your story together. And then finally, well, not finally, but today, our third session is all about engaging Congress, because taking your story and your willingness to advocate Congress is exactly what will help us pass the DREAM Act. So next slide, please. All right, so this is not this session today for me, I really wanted to be very, very practical. If you've had little to no contact with Congress before or a congressional office, it can be a little intimidating. And really, at the end of the day, they're just human beings working in an office. And so we want to just like pull the curtain back on how congressional offices work, demystify sort of what it's all about and approaching a congressional office so that you build a certain understanding and with that a comfort level to imagine yourself and to actually take steps to engage your member of Congress. And we'll make sure that before we wrap this up today that you leave with some very discreet but very doable next steps so that you get a little practice. Next slide, Nicole. Okay, just a little reminder about why your voice matters. Members of Congress respond to constituents and real stories. Honestly, they come across a compelling person who shares their story and helps create in their mind an aha moment. That is like the seed of policy and drafting a bill and trying to change the nation's laws. So, dreamers, you all have lived experiences that are very powerful. It's what put the Dream Act and dreamers as a whole and sort of the United States of America's map. People know who you are because of it. And then when you raise your voice, it's very important because congressional offices do track what people reach out to them about. And you can imagine they've got a million and one things coming at them, all, on the environment, on gun control, on energy policy, on international policy. Anyway, if you don't raise your voice about the DREAM Act and about the issues that impact you, you will just be ignored. And so this is what we're here to do to raise our voices, educate, and get Congress to pay attention to us. Next slide, Nicole. Okay, I'm sure that you all have been through like civics class or American history class, but just like a little simplified refresher. So Congress is one of three branches of government, right? So Congress makes the laws. The administration, in this case, it's Trump and all of the different agencies, including DHS, they enforce the laws. And then the Supreme Court actually interprets the law. So for example, like with the DACA case that was pending before the Supreme Court, right? We and others, litigators, thought that the Trump administration overstepped by trying to get rid of DACA. And so lawsuits were filed, and the case proceeded. And it really is up to the courts to decide, sort of interpret the law when there are misunderstandings, divisions, or, in the case of the current administration, major overstepping of the law. And in Congress, where we make the laws and where the dream would need to be drafted. Well, it's drafted already, but passed. There are two chambers, the House and Senate. Each of you who live everywhere else but DC have two senators per state. And then each state has a different number of representatives depending on the population size, but each of you live in a single congressional district with one US representative. And it's your senators and your representatives who you engage on questions of changing the law in the DREAM Act. Next slide. Okay, so before we get any further with sort of explaining about Congress and walking through the slides, we are going to pivot right now to a conversation with a very good friend and very talented Hill professional, Julissa Santoy Gold. She currently works for Congressman Chuy Garcia, 4th District in Illinois. It's a part of Chicago. She is actually from the district. She has served that district, not just with Chuy Garcia, but with Congressman Luis Gutierrez, who that's where we met. We both worked for Congressman Luis Gutierrez. And she's had the distinct experience, it's not found often on the Hill, where she worked both in the district office, which is where a lot of the casework and community outreach and community engagement happens, and then moved to the DC office, which is where I got to work very, very closely with her. Like she's so well-rounded. She never forgets her community. She is like the loveliest friend in the world, and is very, very committed to this issue and to this community and getting the DREAM Act passed. So I just wanted to say, Julissa, welcome, and thank you so much for being here. And I was hoping that as we got started, you could share a little bit more about your story, like where you grew up, where you went to school, and how you came to work on the Hill and what that experience was like when you were a young woman starting your career.
A younger woman. Thanks, Susan. I'm really grateful to be here with you, Gabby, and the whole team. It really means a lot to have been tapped in for this opportunity. And hey to everyone out there. Julissa Santoy Gold, as Susan mentioned, a daughter of the southwest side of Chicago, born to Mexican immigrant parents from Monterrey, Nuevo León. I'm a product of the Chicago public school system. I went to a public university, the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So I think for me, community always at the root, I think, of all the work that I do. If I could, Gabby inspired me to share I guess the first moment in which I performed in advocacy, um, action in 2006 when we were in high school at Whitney Young, close to downtown Chicago. The big immigration marches of 2006 were taking place, and they were walking right underneath our building. We have a bridge, and we sought out our principal as a group of Latino students, to ask for permission to join the march or to be excused from school to join the march. We then realized that our colleagues were being impacted, our parents, were mixed status, etc. So we got a no. And we were told that if we didn't come to school, we would be marked as truant, and that would go on our records. And going into, junior year where you're getting ready for college, it was tough, but we rallied together. We pushed the administration. We asked for a meeting. We laid down our concerns and we negotiated with her. And Dr. Kenner actually let us participate as long as our parents signed off. So, and I didn't know it back then that was me being an advocate for my community, for the folks that I cared about the most. But now looking back at it 20 years later, uh, it starts when you're young and we don't even realize it. So, as Susan mentioned, I was privileged enough to work at the district office for Congressman Luis Gutierrez and started answering phones and became a caseworker. An opportunity, came up to pivot to DC, which was a little scary. I didn't know anything about it, but that was probably the scariest thing I've ever done. In 2014, I packed up my bags against my mom's wishes and I moved to DC. And I had no idea what was happening half the time, but we figured it out. Did a little bit of legislative correspondent work, pivoted to legislative space for just a few months, and eventually landed where I am now in more of the operations and scheduling administrative field. So This January will be 14 years of service for me across two offices. I'm really proud of that. I've only served the district that I grew up in, so I'm really proud of that. DC for 7.5 years, and I'm actually back in Chicago now. So I've gone from district office to DC, and I'm actually back in the district office now. So in my DC capacity, but still helping out my colleagues on the ground. So that's a little bit of the 14-year journey, I think, and we're here today.
Thanks, Julissa. I remember folks who've joined this webinar should understand, like I met you back in the day when you were a caseworker, but I really got to know you in that transition from leaving Chicago and your family, and the trepidation you felt about moving to DC. It's always fascinating when somebody with fresh eyes takes a peek at the inside of a congressional office. Was there anything about a congressional office, like when you got there and had a look around, like that surprised you?
Honestly, I think I just assumed that the teams in the district offices were just naturally smaller. And I assumed the district office, the DC office would have a larger staff, with more bodies doing more work, since the work is a little bit different. But I was shocked to see that a very small group of, tight colleagues were producing an insane amount of work. I always like to tell folks who call the office, there's at max 18 of us at any given moment, and we have 700,000 folks to serve. So I think the size of the team was really shocking to me because I constantly saw the congressman on TV in the community doing the good work. And I'm like, oh, well, surely there's an army behind him. No, a small army of about 5 to 8 at any given moment. So that was huge, I think, for me to know that so few people could have so much influence and be shepherds of such good work. I think also, as the newest person at one point in that office, I thought that because I was not on the legislative team, that I wasn't going to be able to contribute to a lot of conversations. And I remember an instance when our communications director actually turned in a meeting and asked me, he said, well, what do you think? You're from the district. You just came back from there. What are you hearing? What do your aunts or uncles say? How would your parents digest this information? And so having that community tie ended up being one of the most valuable things I think that I brought to the position that in that moment and then till today.
Right. And anyway, I consider that to be like when you think about constituents and their lived experiences back home where elected officials represent, right? Like folks on this call would have the same sort of insights and ability to contribute um, to the work of a member of Congress. I mean, you talked about staff. It's actually a nice transition. Could you give people a sense of, like, high level, the difference between a district office and the Washington, D.C. office, for which purposes they would go to one or the other? And then, like, a lot of people think when they get started that, like, the only person worth talking to is the member of Congress, when in fact, knowing who the key staff are and when to reach out to who when, like those are very important things to kind of understand that just helps you kind of be more effective in your advocacy.
100%. I think I like to think of I often describe the district office as the instant gratification type of office where you're talking to people one on one, you are addressing their concerns. They walk through the door and they see someone who looks like them, sounds like them, and they ease up and they, see government in a different way. So that's very exciting. And DC, you always consider it to be the place where the laws are made, where policy happens, where the drama, goes down. I think the district office for sure is the place where constituents come and bring us their day-to-day issues, you know, the things that they need help with, even getting resources. It doesn't necessarily ever have to be something that goes through a federal agency. We often help folks with things at every level of government because they're just looking for a place to help them. So I think Chicago or any district office is very constituent facing and service, forward. The DC office is going to be where all of the concerns that come through the door at the district level eventually inform the work that's being done in DC. We, often have calls where we discuss trends, right? Who came to the office this week? What was the main request? What are the phone calls about? And those conversations between the two offices are really where the ideas are being had and where the work then starts to grow. So and of course, DC, everything takes a little bit longer. It's more of that slow release. It could take months or years before you see something happen. But I know that they're working hard and it's definitely always informed by what's happening on the ground. So that's kind of how I like to make the distinction between the two.
And then if you could you share a little bit more? So in a circumstance where somebody is having like an immigration issue, right? Like maybe somebody in their family um, needs a visa, or somebody has an immigration request to check in with immigration that they don't understand, um, versus like somebody who is like, I've got no path forward to permanence in the United States. I want to fight for the DREAM Act. And so like just to be clear with folks, sort of when they go to who for what.
For sure. I mean, just today, for example, we had a DACA recipient who came into the office and expressed to us the concern that many folks are facing across the nation at the moment, that they had applied for their renewal and it hasn't come in yet. And they're facing pressure from their employer. And so they came to us, to see what we could do for them. Made sure they were constituent, gathered all the details about their case, and then we filled out some forms. Of course, we can reach out to the agencies on their behalf. We kind of cut the line in a sense, right? Instead of having you sit on a 1-800 phone line for hours and hours on end and getting the runaround, there are direct folks that work specifically for offices like ours who sole job it is to answer our questions. So then we take, the necessary information, reach out to any federal agency and ask, right? We have a constituent XYZ. They have this concern, fill me in. Where are we on their application? Do you need something else from them? Can we help you get something in a quicker way? And we take that opportunity to, advocate for them. Hey, this person is facing, their job being their job ending if they don't have a work permit by X amount of time. So, whenever we can, definitely advocating for folks in that way. So that's something that, for example, we've done today. But I know that just also today, I've also compiled a list of requests for the congressman's meetings next week when he'll be in DC. And there's a group in that mix who would like to sit down with him and our team to discuss, advocacy for, the DREAM Act. So in that request, the congressman will learn who is trying to come to the office, what they'd like to talk about, who they're bringing, and of course, schedule permitting, we'll always do our best to put the congressman in front of a group. But his schedule is really tight, but that's why we have dedicated staff for that. So in that instance, one of our legislative assistants will probably sit in or take over and gather all of the information and then brief the congressman at a later date about what the request was from that meeting, what we can do, and the steps, to take to make sure that they receive assistance afterwards.
Right. Um, yeah, exactly. I mean, I feel like a few of the key folks that folks should just appreciate when trying to build a relationship with the office of a member of Congress. One is whoever manages the schedule, right? Because if there's a person besides the chief of staff who probably spends a lot of time with the member and has some influence, it's going to be the person who manages the member schedule. And especially like if you're looking to set up a meeting, first request goes through the scheduler for the member of Congress, even if in the end you end up meeting with a staffer. And then if you do end up with the staffer, right, in this case, the DREAM Act, right, you're going to end up with the person who, if you're not meeting with the member, the scheduler will pass the request on to the legislative assistant or aide that handles immigration. And jump on that opportunity because that person really does know uh, immigration pretty well and what the DREAM Act is and has some influence over the positions of the member of Congress. So Um, One of the things that I'm seeing pop up, I'm not following the chat very, very closely, but I am seeing like there is a lot of difference between one member of Congress to the next, how well they have constituent services, how responsive they are to constituents, and then whether or not they're friends of immigrants, right? And dreamers in our community naturally have some trepidation about going to congressional offices, like to send an email with a letter, you've got to give up your address, right? So there is some legitimate anxiety about engaging with members of Congress. Like what kind of obviously Chuy Garcia is an immigrant himself. He has immigrant story from Mexico, and you all have an orientation in your district to help everybody, no matter their immigration status. It's not the case across the board. So what can you share about just sort of the differences of what people should keep in mind, and if you have any advice for them in that regard?
I definitely, we've felt that pressure as well as a team. Obviously, being on the ground in Chicago, I'd be remiss to not bring up, last year we got slammed with Midway Blitz, and there was just a constant need for us to be in the community and helping folks out. And a lot of fear came from that. Of course, we were seeing people not wanting to leave their houses, not wanting to take children to school. And so we had to figure out how to reach, vulnerable populations. So, I mean, our team, for example, went out into the field. We were going to people where they were at if they needed assistance. If someone needed that follow-up on a case and they were afraid of leaving their home, our team would drive to them, bring them the paperwork. But I know that not every office is the same. So I think first I'd like to say to, to trust the members that you do know are your allies, because your safety and peace of mind is definitely at the core of the work that is being done. We will never do anything to jeopardize, anyone that we serve or otherwise. So I think for us, we've made that pivot into, having more virtual meetings, not having them in person so much. If we have to do it in person, only sharing an address, just, minutes before, et cetera, just to reduce the possibility of any, danger, having folks outside in the area surveilling, et cetera. So um, I would like to also mention that at least, in our office and most, I think the information that is being shared when you are asked for an address or a name, et cetera, is strictly internal, right? For us, it's for strategic purposes to see what areas geographically we need to pay more attention to or give a little bit more, service to. So that's we use that to pull reports for the congressman so that he gets a good picture of where the pockets of need are and how we move our work in that direction. So always feel free and safe to reach out to the sympathetic members, because we do love hearing from you, and it 100% shapes the conversations that we're having as a team on the ground in the district back in DC. I think for folks who might not be as comfortable with sharing information, I saw someone dropped in the chat, find a trusted friend or family member. I know there was a while where I had an aunt who was undocumented at one point, and just was afraid to call and follow up on her case. She's like, "No, Mija, can you do this for me?" And in whatever way I could, I would call, I would, inquire online or check websites and feed her the information that she needed. A lot of the time in the office, we can tell that folks are calling with a script, and some folks will even say, "I'm calling on behalf of my friend because they are not able to. My name is Julissa. This is my address. Please note this message down. Now, I support the DREAM Act. I want to see a comprehensive immigration reform package pass, etc." So you don't have to be the person calling, someone can do it for you. And it still counts just as much, if anything, double, because we know that there's another person behind that story. And I think another thing that I've really come to appreciate this past year is that, and I used to feel that the only way to be an advocate was to like put my physical self in a situation, right? Attend the rally, go to a march, etc. But when we're talking about advocacy, we're talking about the village that it takes to get all these things done. And think of any march that you've ever been to. there is the physical act of showing up, gathering, and marching, but there's so much prep that happens before that. There's logistics, there's communications items that need to be addressed, there's
Research.
supplies that need to be purchased. So
Mhm.
don't ever feel like if your body is not physically there, that you're not engaging or that it's not meaningful advocacy. 100%. Show up,
Yeah,
put the whistle packets together. That is you being a part of that advocacy.
right,
Even though we don't see you, we know you were a part of it.
right, right. No, that's wonderful, Julissa. I think we'll anyway, we've talked about even in sharing your story, if you're not able to be very public with your story, have somebody else share it on your behalf. Um, we'll hit the pause button on this conversation. We're going to have a chance. Julissa is wonderful. She's going to stick around with us for the full hour, and you'll have a chance to ask her and me and Gabby any questions you have about congressional offices in a little bit. But for now, we're going to return to the slides, get through a little bit more of our information before we get to Q&A. Okay, so Julissa did we've mentioned this, right? The idea that not all members support the DREAM Act, some of them are anti-immigrant, restrictionist, are not terribly friendly. It's really important to do your research and find other ways of engaging that office or holding them accountable. Um, the key thing to learn is that you do have choices. You can engage directly yourself. You can engage through organizations like the DREAM Act and other allies, and then ask a trusted friend or other ally to advocate on your behalf. The important piece is to be safe. Next, I just want to show you a few video clips to demonstrate when a member of Congress learns about somebody's story, right? You could full on share every detail about your life and photographs of yourself, all the way to just sharing your story anonymously. And I have three different examples about how members of Congress kind of use these stories um, to advocate for Dreamers and for the DREAM Act. And Nicole, you can hit play on
Born in
this one from.
Mexico and brought to this country when he was just 6 years old. He grew up in the United States, learned English, and dreamed of giving back to the country that had opened so many doors of opportunity for his family. Despite not being able to join the military, Christian persevered. He worked hard to earn a degree in business administration, and now he helps oversee a multi-million-dollar business in Las Vegas. Through his work, he's able to contribute to our community and lead by example as a dreamer and truly as an American.
So that was Senator Cortez Masto from Nevada sharing Christian's story. He shared all kinds of photographs with her. It's actually, she did a much lengthier video that she posted on Instagram. In our recap, we'll send you a link so that you can watch the full one, but that gives you a taste of somebody who is very public about their story and how a member of Congress uses it. Nicole, can you go
Born
to
in
the next
Mexico.
slide? And this next is about Roberto. He's from Arizona, and doesn't isn't quite his story is a sharing of a name and a bit of a story. Go ahead and play it.
Or Roberto, another guy who was brought in the United States when he was 18 months, grew up in Tucson, is now a mechanical engineer student at University of Arizona. You know why this matters? Because we're trying to get as many mechanical engineers in Arizona as fast as possible. We can't even meet demand. It's like we're literally trying to get as fast as possible, and now we're potentially deporting somebody. He's married to a U.S. citizen, and he wants to get a master's degree in robotics, and he was recently put in deportation proceedings.
So again, another one of our scholars, his first name was shared, some of his story, but you'll see how this one isn't quite as sharing it all with photographs. And this setting he was in, it was a spotlight hearing actually about dreamers and DACA holders that we and even some of our DC area dreamers joined. But this last one is we're returning to Senator Cortez Masto. TheDream.Us shared 10 anonymous stories of our scholars, and she built a whole floor speech that she delivered on the Senate floor. This little clip is just one of them. But again, this is how a member of Congress, moved by a story, even an anonymous one, can use it in their advocacy and raise awareness.
I'm going to share a couple of the stories with you. In Denver, Colorado, a college sophomore studying business and her younger sister, who was about to graduate from high school, were held in an immigration detention center for 4 months. Now, their stepfather is a veteran of the U.S. military, and neither sister has any criminal history, but they were detained all the same at their... They were detained, why and how? Because they went to their scheduled check-in appointment that they were required to do. They were following the law, and ICE detained them, held them for 4 months.
So this was Senator Cortez Masto raising the alarm of some of the enforcement that we've seen against dreamers. Of course, when members of Congress share stories, it doesn't always have to be the most challenging kind. Just sharing your story about your dreams, your hopes, your education, the way you stand up for your siblings. Anyway, they can also be just inspirational as a means to advocate for the DREAM Act. So I hope those 3 examples give you a sense on the scale of like anonymous to full disclosure, the ways in which that members of Congress use the stories of their constituents to raise an issue and to assert their support for something like the DREAM Act. Now we're going to transition to questions and answers. Gabby, I know that you've been paying very close attention to the chat. If folks have questions for me or Gabby or Julissa, Gabby, do you see any themes coming out of what people have been putting in the chat?
Yeah, it was as if you all were following the chat. So it was really nice uh, to see. And some folks have just not had good experiences with congressional offices being responsive. Others live in districts where the members are not friendly. And so how to navigate that and how to ensure that their stories are still being heard or that their cases are being helped with. Yeah.
And Gabby, do you have anything to share in that regard? You're from the state of Florida, which is deeply conservative and have many years of experience in dealing with Republicans and conservatives. What advice do you have in those circumstances?
They are the people that need to hear from us the most. And it's really important. Safety is key, and we just want to reiterate that and making sure that you're aware that you might not necessarily be welcomed as you would be welcome in the office of Chuy Garcia with Jaleesa's, open arms and saying, let's help you, let's figure this out. But you have to be persistent. You have to also take out the as much charm as you can and just be patient and courteous as you're having these conversations. And what usually happens is that, especially when you start sharing your story, you melt people's hearts. You really start making people feel uncomfortable about their stances. And I have heard throughout the years from senators to staffers that carry the story of one person. And once Rick Scott showed me a letter that a dreamer who benefited from the passage of in-state tuition when he was governor, he carried that with him in his wallet. I was like, huh, I ran into him at the airport. So we don't know, right? We know our stories are powerful. We don't know the type of power it's going to do and what type of seeds, right, we're planting along the way when these are going to start sprouting. So I would say you have to find ways to talk to these offices. And now, if you're trying to get them to help you, you have to be persistent. And the other thing too is reach out to us, especially if you're having issues with DACA renewals or some sort of immigration issue. Maybe we can also help you navigate that. There are certain offices, like Julissa was saying, right, that they might not be you might not live directly in your district, but adjacent, maybe you work in the district that or your school is in that district. That's enough, right, to get you on the hook. And then definitely Democrats, like the senators, Senator Cortez Masto, Senator Durbin, who has been leading the DREAM Act, Senator Murkowski, right, who's a Republican from Alaska. Them hearing from you too helps ensure that they know this is a big issue, that they're hearing from 300, 400, 500 thousands of dreamers who are saying the same thing. It really helps create an awareness that it puts them in front of their face and that they just cannot ignore it. We want people to not be able to sleep at night because they're like, oh, this is an issue, right? And we're going to do more also of getting stories in the media, of making sure that we have social media, and that we break through the bubble so that our messages could be heard by all.
Yeah, that's great. I see questions in the chat, people wondering if their member of Congress isn't so friendly, how is it that they stay safe? And some of the things that we've discussed is have a close friend or ally share your story or speak on your behalf. Sometimes it's just a question of going in a group, right? Like maybe you bring your favorite high school teacher or your closest friend, or somebody here mentioned your church pastor, right? Like you go in a group. Another way is, I mean, so much of our interaction now with one another is virtual. If you request a virtual meeting, you have so much more control over uh, whether or not you're on camera, whether they know where you are, whether or not you're physically in person with them. So anyway, there are definitely options, but any other suggestions to make, Julissa or Gabby?
I'll say that, it becomes inevitable, right, for these members. Uh, we're driven a lot of the times by data. If we get, like Gabby said, 300, 400, 500, emails, letters, calls about the same thing, it forces that issue to the top of the agenda for any given week, and the work that we're doing, what we brief the congressman on. And so that should be happening in all the other places. They can't ignore, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of requests. So it does move the needle, definitely. And electronically, like there's a whole department in that office that deals with correspondence and having to respond to these inquiries. And so putting the squeeze on them also is going to be important. I think I'll also speak, I think for the office, or for my experience in the office, is that if you're willing to give your name, your address, your comment, your question, concern will be formally logged in a database, like I said, internal to us, and that's where we track our data. But I'm still going to answer the phone no matter who calls and no matter where you're calling from, Mexico, Florida, Nevada, wherever. And while the numbers aren't being tracked, it still forms part of that larger data set that we then use to inform the work. So just because, you're not formally being logged does not mean that you're not being heard. If the phone is ringing all day, they have to answer all day. And I think as long as, at least for me, if someone is keeping it polite and courteous and, they're not being offensive, etc., I will listen to them. It's my job. That's exactly my role. So always feel free to do that as well. Even if you're not being logged formally, you're still being heard.
Julissa, do phone calls to the Capitol offices in Washington, D.C., are they still going through a switchboard where the receiving end within the congressional office, they don't have access to somebody's phone number?
Yeah, if you call the switchboard, which if I'm not mistaken is 202-225-3121. I can Google it. But if you called that number and asked to be patched through an office, that there's that third party, right? That's connecting you. So when we get the phone call on our phone, it'll just say US Capitol switchboard. So it eliminates your phone number. We have people calling our office directly who, I don't know if *69 is still a thing where they block their phone numbers. So there is definitely ways to conceal, some of the information that you are given. So
Yeah.
yes.
Gabby, any other burning question that you saw that you feel like we should answer before moving back to our informational slides?
So really, just to reiterate this idea of safety and how to stay safe, this is just two wonderful tips. The other thing too is when we have asked our scholars and others to share their story, we don't tell them to out themselves and say, I'm undocumented or I have DACA, right? You don't necessarily have to go through the details. And you can make it a little bit ambiguous to say, I'm affected by it. I don't usually use the word undocumented in public. It actually has a negative connotation. I use it within our community because that's what we know, right? And I'm not going to use the I word because we know that no human being is illegal. But in public, we use the word dreamer. And dreamer has such a positive connotation and they know about it that it helps. And in 2018, when Arizona was working on their Proposition um, 318, a couple of years later, they polled and they asked and they try to see what wording would work or not. And dreamer is definitely the word that gave most positive. So that's another thing. Be careful with, the language and how you frame things. And um, again, you don't have to go, specific into your story and share, more than you don't have to. I think you can just really call and say, I just want to say this is really important. It's affecting my community. Da, 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 da.
Great.
I agree, definitely. I mean, if I could just say, when someone's calling our office, we're not asking, for any identifier besides your name and your address, right? So that we can geographically see where you're calling from to identify where the need is. But if you don't provide that, that's totally fine. You can just say, "Hi, I'm Susan. I have concerns about, dreamers not being able to work and live the way that they should. And please log my message." It can be as simple as that. You don't have to give us the full rundown. Keeping it simple is also really helpful for us, and it helps us, take more and more calls.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. In the interest of time, we'll get the slides back up. And all right, excellent. So we've been preparing you all to engage in advocacy, and we, for the first time, I think, in the history of TheDream.Us, we actually have a couple of advocacy interns. Berjan, there in the pink shirt, he couldn't join us today because he's traveling. But really quick, he studies legal studies at Purdue Global University Online. He's a bilingual creative and business leader with experience in commercial photography, investment management, and nonprofit leadership. And he founded a local soccer association to build community through playing soccer. So that's Brajan. He'll join us at some other point and say hi in person, but I wanted to turn it over to Maria Jose, who is here with us, to give her a chance to say hello and to give us some instruction about how to look up our member of Congress.
Hi everyone, nice to see you all. My name is Maria Jose. I am 20 years old. I moved to Florida when I was 6 years old, and I'm currently attending Lynn University, and my major is social impact and entrepreneurship. I'm also Honduran, so hopefully any Hondurans in the house. Um, and I just wanted to quickly go over what to do, how to find your senators and your representatives. So I'm going to share my screen. So there are going to be two. Can everyone see my screen? Yes, okay. So there's going to be two websites. So the first one is senate.gov, which is where you're going to find your senators. So when you write that, you're gonna get to this screen and you're gonna go to senators and you're gonna look contact, you're gonna click on contact your senators. And then for example, I live in Florida. So there's a drop-down menu of the states and you can choose Florida and you would be able to see your senators. There's also their DC office phone number, and if you even click on their name, it leads you to their website. So there's their contact information, a little bit about them, and a lot just information on them. And then for the representatives, you're gonna pretty much look up house.gov and this is going to be the website that you're going to be led to. On the top right corner here, it's really small. It says find a representative and you enter your zip code. So I wanted to show you guys two different things that may pop up when you put your zip code. So for example, there's a chance that your zip code leads you to one representatives, and pretty much you can also find information on them when you click their link. Or there's a chance that when you put a zip code, there's they overlap their congressional districts, so there may be two. So it's going to ask you to put the street address of where you live. So for example, I'll just put, I know an address here. And then once you do that, it will show you specifically who your representative is. And again, if you click their name, it takes you to their website with you can contact them, there you can email them, phone number. There's a lot of different ways, send a letter to contact them, but that is how you find your senator or your representative.
Thank you, Maria Jose, and thanks for joining us and for your work with us this summer. You'll see more of her around as we do this work together. Nicole, let's go back to the slides. And I think we covered some of the information on some of these slides, so I'll be a little bit quicker with these. So there are multiple ways to engage your member through the phone call, emails, or letters, which we did in the very first session on the DREAM Act. You should follow your elected representatives once you identify who they are through social media, and then through meetings, which we will dig into a little bit more deeply in a future session, which I'll get to in a moment. Next slide. Other key thing, these are not sort of one-off things where you make a call and you're done. The most effective way to influence a member is to remain engaged. Even if that engagement is somewhat at a distance, right? Like maybe it's through social media or virtual meetings or by making sort of consistent calls and getting other people to call them. They need to hear repeatedly how important the DREAM Act is. Next slide. Okay, now this is, anyway, I wish I had a drum roll. You may recall that after the first session, we were like, we're pulling an advocacy team together of our scholar and alumni. We need to give it a fancy name. And Gabby put up a poll and people voted about what we should call ourselves. So the vote is in. People wanted to call themselves very aptly the Dream Team, with DREAM standing for Dreamers, Rising, Educating, Advocating, and Mobilizing. And so, yeah, like 2026 is our year. We're going to fight for this. This is the year of the dream, the year we organize, mobilize, and the year we force Congress to pass the DREAM Act. Next slide. Okay, Dream Team. This is your homework. These are the next steps. So Maria Jose showed you how to look up your members of Congress. We'll share those links. You will get a recap of this session to help you remember if you weren't taking notes. Really important to review their stance on immigration and the DREAM Act. And by this, you could they always have search functions on their websites. You can do a major web search and you'll get all kinds of dings. An interview on CNN, what they posted on their Instagram account. Trust me, you put their name in the search bar and immigration or DREAM Act, and you will get something back on probably most members of Congress to know what they're up to. Follow them on social media, find out what they're saying every day, what's important to them, what they say about immigration helps you get to know them. And then, a small effort, one email, which is like sending a letter, or one call about the DREAM Act. So I think that's manageable. Your to-do list until we meet again. Next slide. Okay, looking ahead, we don't have enough time in an hour to do a deep dive on how to run a congressional visit. If you get an appointment, either in person or online, or you're preparing a team or allies, a group of folks who are going to be doing this, we're actually, our next meeting is going to be, we're going to do some role-playing exercises in small groups. So please come back and join us to learn how to do that and how to practice it June 30th, Tuesday evening, same time at 6 p.m. Next slide. So anyway, this is it. You've built your knowledge. Our next session, you'll get a little chance to practice some more. And then we'll carry all this into action. And this is the end of our slideshow, and I'm going to turn it over to Gabby to wrap this up and say a few last words. And thank you again, just to the team that's behind, like Nicole Wesley helping with the slides, Nicole Mejia helping with the invitations in the Zoom, Julissa Santoy for showing up, Gabby for always inspiring us, and all the other folks who support to make these happen, and everybody else for showing up on an evening. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Gabby.
And thank you to Susan Collins for bringing us together today. So I want to take you back to June 15, 2012, and that's one of the core memories I have in my brain. I was in DC watching along other dreamers as President Barack Obama spoke from the Rose Garden, announcing the creation of DACA. And in that moment, I felt something I had never felt in my life before: freedom. For most of my life, I have thought of myself as being a bird in a cage. And when I was little, younger, the cage did not seem so bad. I can still fly, I can see the sky, I can interact with other people, I can still dream, and I can still, think about being on the outside one day. But as I got older, the cage started becoming a lot smaller. And it started to hurt my wings. It started to limit my ability of feeling good about myself. We we know this, right? And we talk about this as the golden cage. And despite my talents and dreams and love and community and ambition, even the invitations I would get to travel abroad for free, um, no matter how hard I worked, there were always limits. There were always things that limit my ability to do the things that I wanted to do because of my immigration status, because of a piece of paper. And then on that day, on June 15, 2012, I saw the door of the cage begin to open. Not all the way, because we know that DACA has never been permanent and it's not a permanent freedom. But for the first time, I could feel the air hitting my wings again. I can imagine movement, possibility, and a future. But what made that moment even more emotional for me was realizing this, that it was undocumented young people that made that happen, not politicians by themselves, not lawyers. It was undocumented students organizing, organizers, and dreamers, young people who were told to stay quiet, to, be scared, to live in the shadows. But we chose to come out and speak up. And I remember there sitting thinking, as an undocumented Latina, without a law degree, without power, without status, that I was the person leading this campaign along with other undocumented people, and that we were the ones that convinced probably the most powerful person in the country and the world, and the most powerful people to create this program. That is the power of advocacy. And change does not hope happen overnight. Sadly, change is painfully slow, but change can be built piece by piece, conversation by conversation, story by story. And the DREAM Act has been around for 25 years, 25 years of organizing, of marching, of lobbying, of sacrificing, and us refusing to give up. And sometimes people look at that timeline and feel discouraged. I look at it differently. I look at 25 years that we have, and we have all the pieces we've built already. Every story, every strategy, every coalition, every lesson learned, we have the Legos. And now, like expert builders, we need to place them in the right places to finally build the future we know is possible. So I believe we will, because I have already seen what has happened when people have underestimated us and when we have decided to believe in our own power. So I saw it in June 15, 2012, and I believe that we will see it again when the DREAM Act finally becomes law. So thank you all for being here. We will continue this. We will see you in June, and there's a lot more to come. Thank you for being part of this journey. Have a good night, everyone.